If the Pilgrims had decided to consult an ancient Greek goddess, would they have still decided to build a colony in the middle of winter? What do 17th century pilgrims and ancient Greek farmers have in common? And why is the Greek word for turkey a clue that the entire world is confused about poultry? Welcome to Not Another Greek History Podcast, the podcast that aims to be exactly what it says. I'm your host, Onoufilos Dovlepis, and together we'll discover the not-so-frequently told stories of Greece's history that will change the way you view things forever. So welcome back to another crazy episode of Not Another Greek History Podcast. It's November. You know what that means, for Americans anyway. Time for family, food, and maybe too much pie. It's Thanksgiving. For non-Americans, including myself, Thanksgiving is something vague which I have associated only with food without any historical context. It actually goes back, though, from what I've read, to the 1600s and the Pilgrims. I thought to myself, who on earth are the Pilgrims? Because, of course, it's religious, and I thought, well, the Europeans didn't really go for religious purposes to what we now call America. The Pilgrims were English settlers who wanted to completely separate from the Church of England, so it has to do with religion in this case. And they went to North America. They sailed to the New World in 1620 on the ship called the Mayflower. That ship I had heard of. Actually, some people have even told me, tourists who come to Greece, that their ancestors had gone to the United States on that ship. So those pilgrims founded the Plymouth colony in what is now Massachusetts in 1620. So that goes back 400 years by now. So after a first brutal winter, they celebrated a large harvest feast in 1621 alongside the local native, the indigenous people. To be honest, I don't want to say American for them because that's not what they called, of course, themselves. But anyway, that's a different thing. They were called the Wampanoag. I hope I got that right. This event became the inspiration, of course, for the modern Thanksgiving holiday. A lot of British heritage for the US, I have to say. And I mean also the American Revolution, which of course has to do with the British again. But let's look past the history book story. What is Thanksgiving really? It's a harvest festival. It's a day to be grateful, a day to thank the world or higher power, because of course it's religious as well, for survival and for food, for making it through another year. So that idea, the feeling of thanks, it's really old, of course. So today we're connecting the modern table of Thanksgiving to the ancient Greek altar. Let's see how the Greeks celebrated their own version of a harvest thank you. So if we're talking about the harvest, we must talk about grain. And in Greece, grain means two goddesses, Demeter and her daughter Persephone. Dimitra, we say in Greek. In English, you say Demeter. Dimitra was the goddess of the harvest. She controlled the growth of every crop. She was the one who fed humanity. Then comes the great crisis. A word from ancient Greek, by the way, krisis. Hades, god of the underworld, took Persephone. He pulled her down into his dark kingdom. Demeter was heartbroken. She went into mourning. She stopped making the crops grow. She just let the whole earth die. This was the first winter. Zeus stepped in to stop the starvation. A deal was made. Persephone would return to her mother every year. She would spend part of the year in the light and part in the darkness with Hades. When Persephone comes back to the surface, Dimitra smiles. She makes the crops burst with life. That's spring and summer. When Persephone leaves, Dimitra mourns. The land goes cold and sleeps. That is autumn and winter. The annual return of Persephone was the ultimate thank you for the ancient Greeks. It was the guarantee that life would always come back, that they would be fed again. That's our first big tie in. Now let's look at a specific festival. It was called Thesmophoria. It happened every autumn. This festival was intense. It was for women only. Men were not allowed. So keep in mind that not only did the men exclude women from some of their festivals, such as the Olympic Games, which were only for men, but also women had equivalent things only for women. So let's think of this as some kind of spiritual retreat, like the yoga retreats that they do nowadays. The women spent 3 days together. They would fast, they would hold special rites for Dimitra and Persephone, the mother and the daughter. So, why would they have this focus? This festival called Thesmophoria was a big communal effort to ensure fertility, not just for the crops, but for the entire community. So, they wanted the next year's harvest to be strong. The rituals involved some unusual actions. They would retrieve the remains of sacrificed piglets that had been thrown into deep pits months earlier. That's some crazy shit here. They mixed these remains with seeds before planting, kind of dark, earthy fertilizer. It sounds a little strange to us, just a little, but this was their way of directly thanking the earth. They were honoring the cycle of life, death, and rebirth needed for the crops to grow. I always say that for the ancient Greeks, nature was the most important thing. The earth was the first goddess. That is Gaia. Hence, I always say the words geology, geography, geometry, and so on. So they were practically saying thank you for the past bounty. Please bless us with a great harvest next year. It was a tough, solemn, grateful holiday focused on survival. In Greek, actually, the word thank you is Evcharisto. So when you thank God, in church, that is called Evcharistia. That is the word Eucharist. So let's go now to the ultimate thankful pilgrimage. Thesmophoria was important, but even bigger were the Eleusinian mysteries, the Eleusinian, you might say in English, Eleusinian mysteries. From Eleusina, the name of a town which is really close to Athens. It's on the way to Corinth. This was a long secret religious ceremony. It was the most important rite in ancient Greece, and it was all about Dimitra. The participants would make a journey, a pilgrimage. They marched almost 15 miles from Athens to the town of Eleusina. That ancient route that they did, we still have to this day. It's not easy to recognize it in any way because it's just a modern road built on top of the ancient road. But there is, for example, a subway station called Eleonas, which means olive grove, where on the surface of the train station you have some ancient ruins where you could see a bridge where there used to be some creek running along the road. That was a long walk of faith, just like the pilgrims sailing across the ocean. Once they arrived at Elefsina, they entered a great huge temple. The rituals inside were super secret. If you talked about them, you could be killed. But we know the central theme. It was the promise of an afterlife. Because Dimitra brought the grain back from the dead soil, the Greeks believed she could bring them a better existence after their human life ended. They were thanking Dimitra for the gift of agriculture itself. The Eleusinian Mysteries was a huge yearly grateful celebration of life over death, and they remained mysteries. That is the greatest mystery of all. How you keep a secret forever. Last but not least, we'll go to something really, really mundane right now. to make a connection to Thanksgiving again, the Friday immediately following Thanksgiving in the United States anyway is called Black Friday. The first recorded use of Black Friday was in 1869 when a financial crisis, another crisis, the crash of the US gold market, happened. The term's connection to the day after Thanksgiving, though, started in Philadelphia, a city with a Greek name, in the 1950s. Police officers back then used Black Friday to describe the chaos, another Greek word, caused by shoppers, that's not a Greek word for sure, and tourists flocking to the city for the holiday shopping season. Eventually, in the 80s, the term was given a more positive spin. Black Friday first came to Greece only around 2015, so roughly a decade ago. But it has rapidly grown in popularity since then. And because it came quite late, the term was not translated into Greek. So if you visited Greece now, you would see the words Black Friday in English in every shop. The Greeks nowadays are, unfortunately, very receptive, to say politely, to foreign ideas, and uncritically adopt American trends. Halloween, as we've said in an older episode, is another trend that recently came to Greece. Oh my god, it's really humiliating, to be honest, when I walk around the city and I see shops decorated with Halloween ornaments, where you go to restaurants and you see pumpkins and stuff like this. It's weird. And as I said in the episode about Halloween, tell them about that. Tell them how ridiculous it is and that you're not coming to Greece to see American stuff here. Obviously, this all has to do with consumerism. So let's bring it back to the table. In America, people sit down to a turkey dinner. You remember a cold beginning and the generosity of a first feast. In ancient Greece, they gathered at an altar or made a long sacred walk. They honored the generosity of the earth, Dimitra, and the cycle of the seasons. The events are different, the food is different, but the feeling is the same. It is a universal moment of gratitude. That is the same. They need to honor the power that feeds us. We need to keep those things in mind because practically nowadays I think that all holidays that we celebrate, we just go through the motions. We don't really mean any of that anymore. It is important to celebrate that we made it through another year. We don't really realize that. The spirit of Thanksgiving is something that connects us all. It is a tradition as old as the earliest farmers. Wait. We've connected Thanksgiving to Greece, but what about the bird? Let's talk about the animal itself, the turkey. It turns out the turkey's name is one of history's greatest travel mistakes. Well, maybe after naming the indigenous people of what is now America Indians. Maybe after that. The bird is native actually only to the Americas. Yet the English named it turkey. So that is because the English had already been calling the guinea fowl, a bird from Africa, the turkey bird. That African bird came to Europe through the big Ottoman trade routes, so through Turkey. When the American bird showed up, they simply called it the same thing, turkey, a total mix-up. But the Greeks made their own mistake. In modern Greek, the word for turkey is galopoula, from the word galo. This actually means French. The theory is that it probably came from France, which was called Gaul. You might have seen that word, Gaul. So the English blamed it, let's say, on Turkey. The Greeks blamed France. And the Turks, they called the bird Hindi, blaming India. In Portuguese, it is often called Peru. It seems no one could agree on where this amazing American bird actually came from. The common thread that I can see here is that this issue of mistaken identity spans the entire globe. So thank you for listening and make sure that you don't miss the next episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share. Until next time, this is Onoufiros Dovletis signing off from Not Another Greek History Podcast.